Hello, it's Regina. Welcome back to my haunted library. Today we are continuing with, Robert McKee's story, Chapter 8, The Inciting Incident. I still have a long way to go, but we're moving through it slowly but surely. So this is a very important chapter for any fiction writer or screenplay writer. The inciting incident is a key element in your story. So let's take a look at what McKee says. The inciting incident, the first major event of the telling, is the primary cause for all that follows, putting into motion the other four elements: progressive complications, crisis, climax, and resolution. So the first thing he gets into is creating the world of the story. And we hear this term about world building, but whether you're doing something that happens in the house down the street or a complex fantasy world, the writer, and he calls it the author, has to be the authority, he makes that point, of this world. And once the authority is really in place and the reader senses that they're in good hands, they relax into the story. I think that's a good point. It makes a lot of sense and something definitely to strive for. It says you have to get inside a character. We must question all aspects of their 24-hour day. This can be rather a tedious work, but I think doing all that back work on your characters is really important. So he talks about what are the politics of the story. Now, by politics, he doesn't necessarily mean government politics, but the power politics of the story. And I think that's really important because there's no interesting story developed, there's no conflict if there's not a power dynamic that's at play. And that can change throughout the story. We can think of, certain people we think are maybe powerless. At the beginning of the story, everything can change and then the power dynamic completely switches. And that can really make for an interesting story. He calls it like polarizing opposite character motivations, and they're shifting all the time, back and forth. Or maybe half your story you got like a powerful politician, let's say, just throwing that out there, and then someone from his past comes along and exposes something about him and brings him down, which we've seen in recent, if you read the news, you're always finding these stories, but it's interesting to look at that. One thing can cause an avalanche to bring a powerful person down, and then maybe that person fights back, and now we have a different power dynamic. So that shift of power is very important in figuring out how to write an interesting story. If everyone is in agreement, it's going to be very boring. So power dynamics is important. Each role must fit a purpose, and the principle of cast design is polarization. Between the various roles, we devise a network of contrasting or contradictory attitudes. So that's important to keep in mind. It's actually very, I think for any writer, people don't want to be cliche, but it's advantageous to go back and look at the old stock characters, like in the Commedia dell'arte, which Shakespeare used with the wisecracking maid characters, servant characters, like the nurse in Romeo and Juliet was a famous one. If you look at Molière, there's always the stock characters of like the professor who is really kind of a moron and everyone makes fun of him, but he acts like he knows everything. How the servants who are supposed to be the lower class and maybe like not as bright are actually the ones who are, controlling things from behind the scenes. There's a lot of flirtation going on. There's the old man and who thinks he's a lover, being made fun of by the woman he's trying to woo, who's kissing her real lover behind the curtain when his back is turned. I find that looking back at those old comedies in the Commedia dell'arte, it's hard to... Commedia dell'arte was improvised, but if you look at Molière plays, which are hilarious, you'll see those at work. It's important to understand those concepts, because when you're casting your story, you want to have the foil. You want to have these different parts. Now, that doesn't mean you want them to be cliche, but you want to think about how those pieces work in a drama. If it's all flat and everyone's in agreement, you're going to have a very boring story. So it's something to consider. I say go back and look at those old Commedia dell'arte stock characters. It's a lot to learn there. Back to Aristotle. For the purpose of story, a convincing impossibility is preferable to an unconvincing possibility, meaning that don't confuse authenticity with reality. And he uses Alien as an example, one of my favorite films, and how that's a very improbable idea. It could happen, but the reality from that film is not from the idea, but it's from the characters. We believe these characters, the ship, and the way the production design. It was so brilliant because that was the first time. Now I may be wrong, but it was the first science fiction film I can ever remember watching where the ship was presented as like, lived in and dirty, and it wasn't like all space age clean where everything is like pristine. It was like, they're eating candy wrappers on the thing, there's like junk around. They look a little sloppy. They're not in 2001 Space Odyssey suits, although I love 2001, don't get me wrong. It's a different kind of movie, but all of that verisimilitude lended authenticity to that story that was very improbable, but because it had this authenticity, not only did we believe it, but many of us are still obsessed with it. All right, so I like that he used Alien. I definitely give him props for that. He makes the point, authenticity is not eccentricity. In other words, just doing something weird does not make you authentic. Okay, now he finally gets to the inciting incident. The question of the inciting incident is, how do I set my story into action? The inciting incident radically upsets the balance of forces in the protagonist's life. And then he gives a little diagram, which I will try to find online, that the inciting incident could cause something negative or positive. So, for example, like a negative inciting incident would be a rich man is wiped out financially in some kind of stock market crash, and he loses all his money. So that's an inciting incident. Really changes his world. It changes his life. Now he's got to do something to fix it. He's got to get his money back. He's got to do whatever, rob a bank. Or maybe he accepts poverty and finds happiness that way. There's lots of different directions that could go. And the outcome could be very positive. Or you could have a positive inciting incident. Let's say someone very poor wins the lottery. Yay, that's a great idea. But what happens is maybe people start to target him or her and start to take advantage of them and steal their money, and or it makes them, they become a real asshole because they have all this money and they start treating people like a jerk, and they, whatever it is, that two different inciting incidents can have different outcomes. But there has to be some kind of problem. The protagonist wants to restore balance. So you think about your story. At the beginning of the story, things are in balance, relatively, let's say. The inciting incident, whatever it is, changes that balance and upsets the protagonist's world. And the rest of the story is about trying to reestablish some kind of balance. So after the inciting incident and the life is out of balance, the next idea is the object of desire. Something physical or situational or attitudinal that he feels he lacks or needs to put the situation of life on an even keel. So the object of desire could be, well, I lost all my money, I got to get my money back. Or the object of desire could be like, this person really messed with my life and now I'm going to get revenge. Or I'm going to turn the tables on him. Or this guy broke my heart and now I'm going to get him back. Or I'm going to get back at him. Or I'm going to make myself so desirable he's going to be dying to get me back, and then I'm going to reject him. Or whatever the object of desire is. But that can change, if your story is interesting, the change comes along the way, and that object of desire might just be something, that never really comes to fruition. It's just in the chase of that these events unfold. The inciting incident propels the protagonist into an active pursuit of the object or goal. And for many stories or genres, this is sufficient. Like he talks about James Bond wants to defeat his arch enemy. And that's fine for a James Bond film, and we like that about James Bond film, and we don't have to go any deeper. In fact, we don't want to go any deeper because that kind of ruins what we love about James Bond. That a really good story will have two things going on after the inciting incident: the conscious desire towards the object of desire, and then the unconscious desire towards the object of desire. So that goes into a different layer. He uses the film Carnal Knowledge as an example here, which is a great film. And Jack Nicholson's character is this like notorious womanizer who just goes through his life always looking for like the perfect woman and never finding her. None of them ever measure up. And that his conscious desire is to, get laid all the time and have all these women. But his unconscious desire, as McKee identifies it as, and you could argue that this might be true or not, is that he is a total misogynist, and his unconscious desire is he just wants to punish women, and I think that's a pretty good argument for that film. It's a comedy, kind of a black comedy. It's really good. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend it. And then he gives a few other examples, and then he talks about the spine of the story. The energy of protagonist desire forms the critical element of design known as the spine, or through line, or super objective. So that unconscious desire is a given throughout the film. So that is a through line, and you can have like these through lines working in tandem. But you really think about like, what is my through line? That's really important, and that is something that I do see. It's more stressed in filmmaking. And novels can be a little looser with that, I think, in some ways. But I feel like some novels that I've read have really suffered from not having a strong through line. Like, the characters sometimes feel like they're going through the motions. A lot of events are happening, but I don't know what this protagonist wants. I don't know what the struggle is. I don't know what the object is, either conscious or unconscious. So it's very important. And then he writes about the quest. We hear about this idea a lot when we're learning about writing. All stories take the form of a quest. For better or worse, an event throws a character's life out of balance, arousing in him the conscious and or unconscious desire for that which he feels will restore balance, launching him on a quest for his object of desire against forces of antagonism, inner, personal, extrapersonal. He may or may not achieve it. This is story in a nutshell. To understand the quest, you have to ask the question, what does the protagonist want? Bring in the central plot's inciting incident as soon as possible, but not until the moment is ripe. He uses the example of Rocky for this, the film Rocky, and he makes a good point. It's like, well, why doesn't the Apollo Creed fight opportunity happen, immediately? And then the whole story is about that. Because we need to get to know Rocky first. And we need to get to know him as this kind of loser, poor guy, tomato can or whatever. And then we have this tremendous empathy for him. And only then, after we've developed this tremendous empathy for this guy, then the inciting incident occurs. He gets this opportunity to fight, and now we're with him all the way. It's a great movie. It's one of my favorites. He makes this point too. If an inciting incident is archetypal in nature, it requires no setup and must occur immediately. He uses Kramer versus Kramer as an example of this very archetypal because on the first scene of the movie, the wife walks out on the husband and leaves the kid behind. That's archetypal. So whatever comes out of the climax, it could be a tragedy, it could be a happy ending. The protagonist can get what he wants and everyone's happy, or maybe he doesn't get what he wants, but he gets something better. He loses his fortune, but he finds his soul. he loses the woman of his dreams, but finds that the girl who really loved him was next door the whole time. Dorothy, she didn't have to go to Oz. It was right there in her backyard. Whatever your ending is, it has to be a good one. Okay, that was a lot, and I know I rambled. Next week or soon, I will continue with the next chapter. Till then, thank you for stopping by my haunted library, and I'll see you soon. Bye.